We are in a new series. I felt like there was like 3 more left to go in that one, and then I got over it. So we're done with that one. Hopefully you got the idea. Lean into it, right? Listen to the voice of God over all voices. We are shifting to the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth. It's been a decade since I've done Ruth, and it's a great book. It's 4 chapters, so you should memorize this book by the time we're done with this series, right? So read it. It's 4 chapters. You can knock it off. It's a great little story. I did not reference my own text, so I'm like, I want to see what a decade difference makes. So I didn't look at my old notes. I didn't listen to them. I'm sure I will, but I did not for this one. This week we're in an introduction, right? So I've got like the book of Ruth. How many are familiar with the storyline of the book of Ruth? Let me see. True hands. The book of Ruth. So half of you. There you go. Don't bother asking them questions. It's always half. So half of you. So it's a great story all by itself. It just without any background. It's a great story. With background, though, it is a spectacular story. So I'm going to build some background for you going into this story, okay? So we're going to work on some background today. Here's kind of the idea that I think will capture this series this time through the book of Ruth. Here it is. Ready? It is very, very similar, ironically, to our last series. This one is more, I'm going to frame it this way. You cannot see what you're not looking at. All right, it's pretty straightforward, pretty catchy. Sally's always on me. Come up with catchy titles. So you can't see what you're not looking at, right? That's self-evident. But theologically, that's true as well. If you're not looking at the light, if the light's behind you, you can't see the light. You might see some things that are lit up, but you can't see the light. If you're not looking at God, you are not finding Jesus when you're looking this way. When you're looking this way and God's behind you, you are not seeing grace that's right there available for you. That's what's going on in this story. Let me show you a couple things, and then we're going to spend time developing the background. The background's really pretty fun. There's some crazy ideas. Oh yeah, so this is along the idea of you can't see what you don't look at, right? You can't see what you're not looking at. This is Jesus from Peter. When they hurled their insults at him, he didn't retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Why? Because that's not where he was looking, right? That's what Alvin was talking about. Like Job had to go through stuff, but Job somehow is able to keep his eyes like one step beyond that. Instead, speaking of Jesus, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Jesus had his eyes forward. Jesus knew why he was here. Jesus understood what his life was about, what he was accomplishing. And suffering and insults and retaliation wasn't part of his story. This is not the line he was going to go to. For him to go down that road, he would have to turn his back on his mission, look at his circumstances, and just be dealing with those. It's exactly what Jesus didn't do, thank God. Hebrews says the same thing. Fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross. This one here, scorning its shame, like he yelled at the shame that people tried to put on him. He's like, this is not shameful. This is glory. He even introduced the cross to his disciples, his best friends who were going to be totally crushed by his own death. He said, I'm about to show you the glory of God, right? It's time for the glory of God to be revealed in me. And he goes to the cross. In that world, No, that's shame and scorn and suffering. But Jesus had his eyes somewhere else. And he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Like we can do this. That's what Hebrews is telling us. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Like what he pulled off, you can pull off. You can put your eyes farther out. But what do you have to do? You have to listen to the voice of God. You have to know what those promises are. You have to know what you're looking at. But if you do that, you get to look right past the circumstances of our lives. It's amazing. This is a Christian gift. This is an ability. So that's the idea of this book. It's precisely what the Jews weren't doing in the time of Ruth. Yeah? So let me show you this. This is verse 1 of chapter 1. We're going to look at the first verse and the last verse of the book of Ruth today and get some setting around it. Yeah? This is what it says. In the days when the judges ruled, there was famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. So when did the book of Ruth happen? During the judges, yes, during the time of the judges. I'm going to show you a map and explain that timeline, but we know the timeline. It's telling us the timeline. Here's a question for you. When was the book of Ruth written? We don't really know. The time of the judges, this is like a couple hundred years worth of timeline. 250 maybe, yeah? So it's a long time, somewhere in there. We get a couple clues, and we'll show you those. But we get a couple clues, but really it's during the time of the judges. That is a loaded sentence. That is not just giving us a timeline. That's saying something very significant. And then now look at the last verse. So here's the maps. Look at the last verse. And it's just a genealogy. But it says this. Solomon was the father of Boaz, Boaz the father of Obed, Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse's the father of David. Who's David in this David list? King David. This is King David. So if that's how the book ends, and it starts in the time of the judges, and it ends with this genealogy, when was the book written? After David, right? You have to know why you're writing it. You're not just going to pick a name out there. So after the reign of King David, there was a point to write the story of Ruth. It wasn't written down when Ruth lived out her life because it wasn't needed then. Not really. It's needed now. It's needed now. It's needed in Israel after David reigns. So in the reign of Solomon, God writes them the book of Ruth. Why? Why do they need it then? And that's where this whole thing kind of gets set up. This is why we need the background, because something's going on, starting with Solomon moving forward, that somehow the book of Ruth is the cure to. So there must be something similar. So let's look at the background. Go back to our maps. That seems a little washed out, but so this is the Mediterranean. Oh, look, there's a moth. So, butterfly. So this is the Mediterranean Sea. This is the biblical world, right? Mostly. This is Spain over here. Some people would argue that Paul got the gospel all the way to Spain before he died, yeah? This is Rome, Greece, Jim and Cheryl, right over here. Pretty nice. It's pretty nice. Corinth is right over here. Ephesus and Colossae right over here. This is modern day Turkey. This is Syria is right over here. Jordan and those. This is Saudi Arabia. This is Egypt, and this is the top of Africa. Yeah, and over here is in Bible times this would be Persia, but this is the East. And then this is the Far East. China and those are over here. Up here is Russia. Yeah, up there. For these continents to trade, where do they have to go through? The promised land. This is why it's the promised land. I've showed you this before, but it amazes me all the time. Like, why did God pick this as the promised land? If you go there, it's pretty, but it's like Scottsbluff. You go, yeah, it's pretty, but it's not amazing. It's not the promised land. Like, but the wealth and influence and potential of this space right here, it really can't be measured. Now with different kind of travel, we can skip over these spots. But listen, for the bulk of human history, barring the last 100 years, you kind of went right through here to get anywhere across these continents. God puts them right in the center of the world, literally, and with the goal of being hugely influential in this time. This story starts with, and this story happens during the time of the judges. Let me tell you a little bit about the story of Ruth, though, so you get a feel for where we're headed. There's a couple with a couple kids who, and during the time of the judges, things are bad in Israel, right? They are not following God. That's the punch of the book of Judges. 250 years, they cry out to God for help. He gives them a judge. They quickly go right back to idolatry. They get persecuted and they get attacked by their enemies, and then they call out to God, and they just can't stay faithful to God. They eventually say, this isn't working, give us a king, right? So it's before they have kings. It's right after they came out of Egypt. Moses delivers them from Egypt. He takes them to the promised land. God says, I'll be your king, and you just be my people. They have the covenant, follow the rules. You have the temple, follow the rules. Stay in relationship with me. Keep your eyes on me, and let's walk towards renovating this whole piece of land and expanding the Garden of Eden by our influence here. Let's put light all over the world by who we are in this space. People will come through, they'll see the light, they'll see how good I am. They will take that message back to their land, and light will spread all over the place. This was the goal. They couldn't do it. They couldn't keep their eyes on Jesus. During that time, Ruth lives. The story is a couple who live in Bethlehem. It's tough. There's famine, which means it's not a good time. And there's idolatry all over Egypt, so God is judging them and trying to draw them back to himself. And they say, listen, let's just split. Let's just get out of here. So they choose to go to Moab. This is a terrible choice, which you'll understand in a second. They decide to go to Moab. It doesn't go well there. They stay a decade. By the time a decade's over, her husband is dead. This is Naomi's, not Ruth's. Naomi's husband is dead. Her 2 sons had grown up, old enough to marry Moabite women, yeah? And then her sons both die. And she's like, okay, Moab's worse than Israel. I'm going back to Israel. Like, this is worse, going back. And so she says to her daughter-in-laws, listen, stay here, you're Moabites, stay here in Moab, Probably doesn't want people to know she went and her family married Moabites. But Ruth says, listen, no way. And Ruth is this spectacular all-star through this story. She says to Naomi, listen, no, I will not abandon you. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will stay and I will die. Like this is loyalty. She is loyal to a fault. She's going all the way in. She's all in with her mother-in-law. She's leaving her whole family. She is going back to Israel with Naomi. Wonderful. The story of Ruth. Ruth is a Moabite, and she's going to come to Israel expecting to find grace. And that is outrageous. It's outrageous. How can you possibly have a Moabite woman find grace in Israel? Like this is absurd. But it's not absurd, is it? It's not absurd at all. Anyone can walk in those doors. And we're the people of God. They could walk in those doors. Anyone can walk in those doors. And they should be able to find grace right here. Right? This should be the storyline. As a matter of fact, it's what God hoped. I'm going to put you right here so that as nations come through and they find the light, they go, wow, there's a God who's gracious, not a God who's a tyrant, and he is blessing his people. Like, we want that, right? This is the goal. So really, the story of Ruth is the goal. Here's the problem. The problem of the book of Judges is that it's a time when Israel is becoming the Canaanites. Okay, so let's back up a little bit. God called Abraham from over here, and he said, listen, I'm going to make you the Jewish nation. You're going to be my people, and I'm going to give them all of this land right here. I'm going to give them the promised land. But before I give it to them, because it's just Abraham and his wife, who's too old to have any kids. He doesn't have any kids yet, right? And he says, listen, I'm going to give your descendants all of this land. But they don't have descendants. So he says, but before I do, you're going to live in Egypt for 400 years. For 400 years, you're going to live in Egypt. But then I'm going to deliver you, and I'm going to bring you out, and I'm going to bring you into the promised land, and you will overthrow those nations that live there. The Canaanites live here. This is bad. This is bad. It's bad in all of the cultures around them, not just the Bible's language. So as the Egyptian language, and we have a lot of ancient Egyptian cultural writings, we have lots of it, and they talk about the people that live here. Something that begins with a U. Up here, we have their writings. And they refer to the Canaanites, this whole area. Scary. It's very scary. So God says, but he says to Abraham, listen, you got to wait 400 years because the sin of these people, I'm still working with them. I'm still trying to get them to turn. I want time to I don't want to just judge them. God is not a happy to judge, happy to kill kind of God. This is not the right telling. I'm going to wait 400 years. I'm going to work with them. And if their sin keeps building, yes, then they have to go. Because if you put the worst place on the planet right here, and it's the center of the world, this damns the whole world. We can't have that happen. So, but we're not there yet. I'm not ready to give up on them yet. So you have to wait 400 years. But eventually that time comes, and 400 years later, this area is not good. Let me zoom in. So this is Israel zoomed in, right? This is Moab right here. Particularly bad. Well, this is terrible as well. All over here is really bad. The Canaanites particularly live here, or the Philistines rather. Canaan is this whole area. The Philistines, they're bad here. Moabites, bad. Ammonites, bad. God sends his people into the land, and they're supposed to bring light to the world. But the Jews give in to the pressure around them. The Jews find it very, very difficult to be light, to bring light into such a dark space. And so they didn't try. They didn't even try to bring light, not really. They mostly just went for hatred and assimilation. And so they wanted to be like them. They brought their gods in because these people, well, let's talk about them a little bit. This is what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 2, Moses writing. Then the Lord said to me, do not harass the Moabites or or provoke them to war, for I will not give you any part of their land. I have given Ar, to the descendants of Lot as a possession. The Emmites used to live there. The Emmites, this is a Moabite word for giants. Giants, like real giants. The Moabites called them Emmites. The Ammonites call them Zamzumites. We have their writings too. The Egyptians, I forget what they called them. Here's what's interesting. The Egyptians talk about giants as much as the Bible talks about giants, and the Egyptians have their own name for the giants and say that when the Egyptians talk about them and talk about where they live in specific towns, it's the exact same towns that the Bible says the giants lived in. That's pretty weird, right? It's weird to think of actual giants in the Bible as part of the story. But giants live here, and here. And the Bible says specific towns, and so does the Egyptian. And all of the cultures around here all talk about them. They all describe them as incredibly fierce, a people who just kind of hate. I think that's why God gave them the city of Ar, right? They're pirates. When the Jews come here to go into the promised land, right before the time of the judges, they fight the two kings, Sihon and Og. These guys dwarf, they're fierce, they're huge. Og's bed, we don't know how big Og was, but his bed was 14 foot long. 14 foot long. All the cultures around here have writings about him in their language, not in the Bible. They all refer to him, and they all refer to his height and huge and fierceness. Here's the problem. That the giants, in all of the language of all of the texts, including the Bible, they have them kind of related to a bad seed. Most of them consider them demigods on some level. Human breeding with demons and stuff like that. Every culture around here has the same story. Weird. I know. It's weird. But they live here. Like, no, this land is so evil. Don't provoke them to war. And I'm not giving you any of their land. Like you can't go there. Don't go there. God says this about the Moabites. Never, ever marry a Moabite. Like you can't get worse. Or an Ammonite. Like these two right here. Like don't interbreed with them. If you do, your descendants forever are barred from the temple. Like this is a major violation. Like they are associated deeply with the demonic, so that they have the giants are their kings over here. This is bad. It's terrible. It's not only that, but the Moabites are the ones who, when Israel was here, way up here, not even in their land, ready to cross into the promised land and take over here, the king of Moab, Balak, he found Balaam to come and curse Israel and put a curse on them and break the blessing of God and crush the Israelites. He tried very, very hard to break the Israelites and break the promises of God. Balaam couldn't put that curse on him, as you know, in that story with the talking donkey and all that. But he did come up with this plan. He said, they're just people. Just send in the prostitutes. Send in the prostitutes, and you will get them, right? And so King Balak said, okay, listen, all you girls, go sleep with the men of Israel. And they did. And here's what happened. And then the Israelites started worshiping the gods of Molech, right? Because if the girls like it, then the guys like it, because all that chemistry stuff. And the Moabites are responsible for the Jews worshiping Chemosh. Chemosh is, in the Bible, he's described as a fierce, terrible god who demands human sacrifice. Human sacrifice. There's a story in 1 Kings of a king of Moab who was going into battle, and to make sure he won the battle, he took his son and nailed him to the city wall and then burned him as a burnt sacrifice to Chemosh so that Chemosh would help him win the battle. This is a terrible God. Solomon builds temples to Chemosh in Israel 300 years from this time. It's terrible. Moab. Oh, Ruth is a Moabite. And she is going to have the audacity to show up to Israel and expect. She comes with an expectation to find grace. And she's a Moabite. Like the worst possible character. You would expect then that Israel must be an incredible land of grace, right? They must all know this grace. They must love, they're the people of God. They must just be wallowing in grace for Moabites to think they could come and get some, right? You'd kind of have that expectation. This would be a bad idea. This is the time of the judges. Now, we can't really nail down, we don't really know when the book of Ruth happened, but it happened in the time of the judges. But there's more clue. We have the genealogy, right? Ruth marries Boaz. He's an old man. They have a kid. He's old. He's pushing it. He has Obed. Obed has Jesse. Jesse has David. David's the king of Israel after the time of Judges, but not just after the time of Judges. He's after Saul, who reigned for 40 years, who's after Samuel, who gets his own book, and not in the time of Judges. So Ruth has to happen pretty close to the end of the time of the Judges, right? What are the last two stories? This would give us a good setting. What are the last two stories in the book of Judges? Any idea? They're horrible. They're horrible. All of them in the book of Judges are horrible. But the book of Judges, it's so heartbreaking. You have Moses. Moses gives the baton to Joshua. Joshua, he's a hero, right? He's going to lead the people into the promised land. He's going to give victory. He's going to tear down the idols of there. He's going to raise up God. And he's awesome. But he dies, and he says, hang in there. Stay faithful. They have the priesthood. They have the tabernacle. They even have prophets. Like, they have the voice of God. Stay faithful. They don't. They just crash and burn. But the book of Judges is like speed dating the whole entire Old Testament. Like, you just see, like it's one table to the next. Love God, hate God, become idolaters, freak out, love God, hate God, go to idolaters, freak out, call on God. It's just like that. Like literally, sometimes within 8 years. The cycle is really short. It's just boom, boom, boom. But that's the cycle of the whole Old Testament. The story from David to the end of the Old Testament starts with King David, and it ends up with them in Babylon. Like it's a crash and burn over 1,000 years. But the story of Judges is, and God's saying, don't do that again. Don't do that again. This is terrible. The last two stories of Judges, they're heartbreaking. It crushes me. They're heartbreaking. This is one, Judges 18, and it says this: there's this Levite who was hanging out in the tribe of Judah, right? From Bethlehem as well. And he is looking for a place to be a priest. The Levites are the priests, yeah? They're all supposed to be where the tabernacle is. They're supposed to be priests, right? This priest is wandering around. He's looking for a place to be a priest at. He wants to be his own priest. This is bad. He wanders around to somewhere, Ephraim, I believe. He wanders over to Ephraim, and he says he finds a guy who, Micah, his name is Micah. He is wealthy. Micah made his own ephod, which is what God made one ephod, and it was a vest that when people wanted to commune to God, the high priest would put this on, and it would help him commune with God, and God would speak through it and to the guy who wore it. This guy made his own. Micah made his own ephod. Yeah, pretty cool. He made his own ephod, and then he also took a bunch of silver, and he made idols, and then he also made household gods, right? So his own personal idols. So the typical ones, maybe Chemosh and maybe some other ones, and then his own personal gods. This Levite is rolling around and rolls up into Micah's house. Micah says, "Hey, you sound like a Levite. Are you a Levite?" And he goes, "Yeah, and I'm looking for a job." He goes, "Well, why don't you live with me, and you could be my personal high priest? And I have an ephod, and I have some idols. Why don't you be my personal priest, and God will then bless me, and I will buy your food and your clothes, and I'll pay you 10 shekels of silver a year." This guy says, what a fantastic idea. What a fantastic idea. I will be your personal priest. He's a Levite. He should be where the tabernacle is. He's not. This is bad. The Danites, who are also in the storyline of the Bible, not good. They're a tribe of Israel. They are still looking for a piece of land because they've just moved into the promised land. They haven't decided where exactly they want to settle down at, and they don't have a priest. And so they roll up into this area, and they see this guy, and they say to this priest, they say, "Listen," they send in spies, and the spies find this Micah's guy's house and the priest and all that. They go back, and they have a little tribe meeting, and they say, "Hey, listen, there's a guy over here who's really wealthy. He has his own priest, he has an ephod, and he has some idols. Why don't we take all of that stuff and we'll just have our own priest and our own idols and our own ephod as our own tribe, a tribe of Israel." They haven't even settled the land yet. They just got out of Egypt. And Dan is already breaking off with Levites. Right? You see the horror of this? So they do, and Dan sets up their own place. They call it Dan. They set their own temple up. They set their own priesthood up. They do it all themselves. Is this good? This is terrible. You want to know what's worse than that? Read this with me. The city, this is where they settled. The city was in the valley near Beth Rahab. The Danites rebuilt the city and settled there. They named it Dan after their ancestor Dan, really creative, who was born into Israel. Though the city used to be called Laish, there the Danites set up for themselves the idol. Let's read this slowly. And Jonathan, son of Gershon, the son of Moses, was their priest from that time until God kicks them out of the land and sends them to Babylon 1,000 years later. Moses' son and grandson and all of Moses' descendants are priests to idols for the whole Jewish history. I have children. I have hopes they don't become priests to idols. How does this happen? This is what it's going to drop on us? Moses' grandchildren and the people of God The Danites, before they even get in the land, they have decided to not follow God and set up their own, and Moses' kids are their priests. What the heck is going on in Israel? They continued to use the idol Micah made all the time the house of God was in Shiloh. They never went where the thing was, where the house of God was. They stayed in their own, and they used that idol. I'm not going to put the reference on this. I'm just going to read this story to you because I want you to, in your brain, come up with the story, okay? So here's how the story goes. He answered, "We are on our way from Bethlehem in Judah to a remote area in the hill country in Ephraim." This is a different story. This is a different story. Where I live. I've been to Bethlehem in Judah, and now I'm going to the house of the Lord. No one's taken me in for the night. We have both straw and fodder for the donkeys and bread and wine for ourselves and your servants, me, the woman, and the young men with us. We don't need anything. You're welcome at my house, the old man said. Let me supply whatever you need. Only don't spend the night in the square. So he took him into his house and fed the donkeys after they had washed their feet and had something to eat and drink. While they were enjoying themselves, some of the wicked men of the city surrounded the house, pounding on the door, and they shouted to the old man who was in the house, "Bring out the man who came to your house so we can have sex with him." What's the story? No, it's not Sodom and Gomorrah. This is Judges. These are the men. These are the men of Israel. Sodom and Gomorrah, by the way, is in Moab. This is the very last story in the book of Judges. God's people have become Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the point. God called Abraham, like long before this, out of that area. Rescued him from it. And now his children are Sodom and Gomorrah. The story goes on to say like this. The man said, no, don't do such a thing in Israel. Here, have my concubine and my virgin daughter and do what you want to them. So he kicked them out of the house, and the men of the city raped them all night till they were dead. And then the woman was able to crawl to the house, put her hands on the doorstop, and when they went out in the morning, he saw his concubine laying there, and he said, "Get up, let's go." She didn't move. So he chopped her up into 12 pieces and sent her body all over to each some to the tribes of Israel. They freak out and say, "What in the world is going on here?" They all meet, and he says, "These people from the tribe of Benjamin have totally pillaged. They wanted to kill me. They raped my future wife and till she was dead." Israel says, "Well, we have to kill them off. We have to go kill them." So all of Israel goes and attacks the Benjamites. And they fight, and Israel loses a bunch, and God's judging on it. It comes down to there's only 600 men left of all the tribe of Benjamin, no women or children. The rest of Israel has killed all the women and all the children of Benjamin, and there's only 600 men. And then they freak out. They go, "Oh no, what did we just do?" Because they also made a vow that no one else can give any of their women to the Benjamins to marry them. And if they do, they also have to be put to death. And they just said, "Oh no, what did we do? Before we're even a country, we've killed off a whole tribe of Israel." So they said this to them. "Listen, a festival's coming up. And at this festival, all our daughters are out there dancing. You guys hide in the bushes, and during the dancing, you have our permission to come in and steal one of our daughters and run away with her and take her as your wife, and that way we won't be guilty of giving them to you, and you won't die off." Daughters, is this a good idea? Any daughters in the room like this idea? Can you imagine the horror of living in Israel because they didn't become light? They became darkness. And it ends terrible. And then they say, give us a king. And do you know who Israel chooses for a king? A Benjamite. Saul. Why did Saul go bad? Horror. But in the face of the horror, God says this. Oh, no. This isn't coming from me. The reason you're going that way is because that's the way you're looking. You're looking at the idols. You're looking at the things around you. You're wanting them. Turn. Grace is this way. Grace is over here. The way you go is the way the church goes. And the way the church goes is the way the world goes. Every statistic out there tells us that the church right now, today, is just free falling. It's just free falling. Every stat. Compare this generation to 30 years ago, and no one knows the stories. And no one knows who Jesus is. And no one goes to church. And no one becomes missionaries. And it's just crashing and burning. But that's the church, not the world. I'm not talking about America. I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about the church. But if I'm talking about the church, then I'm talking about us. You and me. If I'm talking about the judges, then I'm talking about Moses' kids. That means I'm talking about our kids. Like our kids. And this story doesn't even get told until, no one's going to listen then. God has it written in the time of Solomon because they're just starting to slide. And he's saying, well, maybe they will hear and turn this way. Maybe they will hear and turn. And they'll get their eyes on me. Because the storyline is that the grace that Ruth is going to find in this story, and it's spectacular. You should come. It's only like 4 chapters. The grace she could find, the confidence that she walks around Israel in, because she walks around like she owns the place. She's a Moabite. And she walks around. She's going to say, they're going to just show up in Israel, and she's going to say to her mother-in-law, Naomi, hey, I'm going to go out, and I'm just going to go find some grace. I'm just going to go find some grace. At the same time, Israel is doing this. Like, they're not looking for grace at all. And here's the thing. You can't find what you're not looking for. You cannot see what you are not looking at. God says, listen, my grace is totally available. It's totally available for everyone. My sun shines on everyone. My rain on everyone. I make everyone's crop grow. I give everyone life. I give everyone children and grandchildren, and all the wealth of the world is mine, and I give it to people. Like, I have grace all over. I give people family. I give everyone influence. But if you're looking this way, you don't see that as grace. If you're looking this way, then all you see is lack. All you see is lack, and all you respond to is desire And I don't have, and I don't have, and I don't have, and I can't see, and why me, and why not me, and darkness, darkness, darkness. But if I look this way, and I recognize who God is and how he works, then I can be Job. I can be Paul. I could be the Son of God and face a crucifixion and mocking because there's a God who loves me and knows me and is calling me bigger and deeper than that. I can put my eyes above the waves, as our song says. I can find hope and grace. I can be in a world of suffering. I can be hope and light. But only if I'm looking this way, only if I'm leaning in, only if I am training my heart to walk with God. It doesn't matter that I am God's. We're talking about God's people here. You are now God's people. God writes this story to Solomon, for Pete's sake. Solomon, the wisest king. And God is hoping to stop them from ending up in Babylon. They end up in Babylon. Right now, in this world, we are sliding really, really fast to Babylon. Really fast. It's scary. The book ends, the last verse of Judges says, and there was no king in Israel. But there's not supposed to be a king. God was supposed to be the king. And no, they kicked him out. That's the reference point. It's a little irony because we jump to, oh, well, you need David. You need Solomon. You need a wise king. No, Solomon's terrible, and he brought in idolatry to Chemosh. This is terrible. You don't need a human. There's no king. They walked away from God, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And that's where we are. That's where we are. How does it happen, though? How do we go from the church thriving in the 90s? How in 30 years do we get, look at all the stats of 30 years, church stats for the last 30 years. How does it happen? There's only one answer. And it's just as simple as our entire last series or this series. What are you looking at? Because you can't see what you're not looking at. And we all just throw this around, right? Oh, we're the church, we're saved. But who are you? Are you a person of God? Are you learning and training your heart to walk with God? Are you getting to know the one who loves you? Are you building a relationship that you can't live without? Or is God more trivial? Who were you 30 years ago? Is God less important in your life than he was? You online. What is your trajectory? Are you more solid? Because there were hope, right? There were people of hope. Boaz is a hero in this story. There were people who were heroes. Maybe this is you. Hopefully it is. But the way you go is the way the church goes. And the way the church goes is the way the world goes. I didn't come up with that phrase, by the way. But it's true. This book of Ruth is going to call us back to say, listen, this is what we want. We all want grace in our life. We all want the favor of God in our life. We want to be light and hope. We want our families to be grounded. We want our children and our grandchildren worshiping the one true God. But that doesn't happen by itself. Those are not guarantees. We could be like Ruth. We're supposed to be. We're supposed to walk around like we own the place, walking with God and absolutely expecting grace. God has bound himself to us in an oath. We have a covenant relationship with him that he will not break. But if we don't look at it, then we don't see him. And when we don't see him, we think all is lost. And we walk farther this way. So the challenge of this book is, what are you looking at? Yeah? Okay, let's pray.